really happened a lot of positive change.
Welcome to Chapter and Verse. How can I introduce David Barton? David Barton is one of our nation's preeminent Christian historians. He's with an organization called Wall Builders, and it is a special organization. You've probably seen David Barton on Glenn Beck's program and other programs. You've seen him on Chapter and Verse when we've presented some special Wall Builders programming throughout the years. Let me get to David Barton now. Let's focus on David Barton so that you can get a chance to, there's David.
Yeah.
David, can you introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, I had an organization called Wall Builders, which is a name that we take out of the Bible book of Nehemiah, which has such a great story of people getting involved at the grassroots to change their community.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, we really are uninvolved people in America today. You look at city council elections, school board elections, if you get 3 to 6% of the people voting, that's a lot. And that's terrible. I mean, for our form of government, where we get to choose our leaders to do nothing, this is abominable. So Wall Builders is a name we take and use to get people re-engaged, re-involved in doing things in their community, getting back to constitutional, religious, and moral foundations. Those are what really made us great, and trying to get people re-engaged in doing those kind of activities.
Wall Builders is certainly a special organization. Let's take a look at the times. Let's take a look at the times right now. We were talking about, I guess, what we could call apathy, and it's pretty bad. More than one source has said that the young people today are more likely to get their political news from Jay Leno, Jon Stewart, and David Letterman than from the network news. And cable news is strong, but it's not as strong as, say, a Jay Leno. We were just talking about the fading influence of churches which are into more liturgy and less into the Word, and the strengthening of churches which are focusing in on the Word.
Hey, there's been a real change over the last, I'm going to say 50 years. We've seen it in the courts, we see it especially in education, and with one of the primary purposes of education being to train young people for good citizenship. As you mentioned, they're more likely to get their news from Jay Leno than they are from a news source. And one of the things we have failed in education is really preparing for citizenship. We've done a great job of indoctrinating, but that's not what education's about. I've just gone through a situation in Texas where I was one of 6 experts that was appointed to write the standards for the state of Texas, which will be the standards for all 50 states, the way the textbook publishing market is. And one of the things we found when we started this was, okay, let's look at our high school seniors and see what's happening here. And what we found nationally was that 49% of our graduating high school seniors could not name the 3 branches of government. 49%. We found that among those high school seniors, 54% did not know what free market meant, free market economic or free market religion or anything. Didn't know what free market was.
54%.
54% found that 40% had no clue that profit was income minus expenses. Therefore, how can you deal with the government and spending if you don't even know what profit, income, expenses are? We found that more kids thought that the Constitutional Convention is what created the Emancipation Proclamation with Abraham Lincoln. Now, it's only off by 100 years. They thought that the one who commanded the forces at Valley Forge was Ulysses S. Grant rather than George Washington. So when you look even at basic fundamental materials that should be coming through schools, it's not. So we really had to focus on going back to basic things. We were surprised that even as the standards are given to us, they're prepared by about 240 classroom teachers who write the standards, and we have to review them. In the standards this time, the teachers had taken out things like the Liberty Bell, Nathan Hale, they took out General George S. Patton, they took out Davy Crockett, Daniel Boone, anything that related to patriotism. And so we're trying to create students that are good citizens, but at the same time we're giving them less and less. And we actually had protests at the state capitol in Texas because we wanted to have students memorize sections of the Declaration of Independence. So when you come through an educational system like that, it's not surprising that they're going to turn to entertainment to get their news rather than anything else, because they really don't know citizenship.
Protests? There were protests?
There were protests, not only on memorizing the Declaration, parts of it, and one of the things we ended up doing in the standards, we got all this turned back in the right direction, but it was a fight.
Yeah.
We literally now have the first, well, in 12 years of school, you'll spend 1 week each year reading the Declaration of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and memorizing lengthy segments from them. So instead of reading about the documents, you actually read the documents. We thought that was healthy, but we had protest against doing that, reading the Declaration. We had protest against teaching students the free market economic system. It was unbelievable. We had protests against American exceptionalism. I mean, we are the only nation in the world that does not average a revolution every 30 to 40 years. I mean, we're 192 nations in the world. We've had the same form of government over 2 centuries. Nobody's even close to that. And we wanted to teach that. We wanted to teach, hey, there's a set of ideas on which the nation was founded that made us a stable nation. We have only 4% of the world's population. We have 25% of the world's wealth. We're the most prosperous nation. There's a reason. We wanted to teach that, and we got university professors protesting that we were going to teach American exceptionalism, the stuff that made us really unique and successful. So it was an amazing fight. But that is part of the situation that we've been fighting for 50 years, is our schools are not creating the knowledge base needed for good citizenship. And that's why you're starting to see a lot of outside groups arise. I got a Facebook message just recently from a guy who Facebooked me, and he said, you know, we've started a Facebook group, and to be part of the group, you have to agree to read 1 Federalist paper a day. He said, we've got 11,000 people in the group.
Wow.
Now, when's the last time we had groups formed just to read the Federalist papers? But people are wanting to get back to the documents, wanting to get back to learn why America is what she is, and that's a very healthy trend. So we have that in the civic arena. In the church arena, we are seeing a real return to a knowledge for the Bible, in the same way that there's a knowledge for our founding documents. And the churches that are growing in the nation tend to be the ones that take the Bible and make it very relevant and apply it to daily life.
Yeah.
And the ones that are shrinking are the ones that are living off past glories 2-3 centuries ago, and they're not really relevant for anything going on today.
There was a program, a segment on Jay Leno's Tonight Show called Jaywalking.
Yeah, you bet.
And he asked some pretty basic questions.
Basic questions.
You know, like
real easy.
A picture of the vice president. Who is this? When Cheney was around as vice president, they asked who. They showed a picture of Cheney. People could tell us who Madonna is.
Yeah.
And
they could name the 3 Stooges. They couldn't name the 3 branches of government.
Three branches of government.
Exactly.
This is a worrisome turn of events. What do we suppose, oh, by the way, before we do this, just explain to some of our viewers what are the Federalist Papers?
Federalist Papers was really kind of the commentaries on the Constitution, because at the Constitutional Convention of 1787, they came in and they produced really a unique document that had ideas put in that document that had never before been put in any previous written document. So you had things like separation of powers and checks and balances, full republicanism, all these things that make us different. And as this was sent to the states to be ratified, there were a lot of questions in the states. And Rhode Island didn't even ratify. We refused to be part of the process.
I know.
And so as it got to the various states for ratification, people were asking questions. Well, there had been 55 individuals at the convention who drafted the Constitution, some for, some against. Out of the 55, 40 signed it. Well, you had a need for those who were in the convention to be able to tell those who were not in the convention what the Constitution really would do. And so the Federalist Papers were a number of papers written by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay to tell people what's in the Constitution. This clause, because people would say, well, you know, we're not sure that this thing about the judges is right, and then no, here's what this clause means. So every clause of the Constitution is explained in the Federalist Papers. And as James Madison said, that's the best source for understanding the intent of those who wrote the Constitution and those who ratified the Constitution. So the Federalist Papers is really just a good way of knowing the document. I mean, our congressional officials take an oath to uphold the Constitution. Most of them have not read it. Very interesting thing, back 5 years ago now, there was a law passed, federal law passed, that requires that on September the 17th every year, and that is the day the Constitution was signed in 1787, that on September 17th every year, they call it Constitution Day, every public school has to set aside that day to study and read the Constitution in the school. Well, currently, here we are now, 6 years later actually, and only 10% of schools actually do that. So 90% of schools are still not reading the Constitution. But one of the members of Congress, Mike Conaway, congressman from Texas, said, you know, Constitution Day is also a good day. We ought to have the congressman and the staff read the Constitution, because that's what we're up here to uphold. And so he introduced this resolution to read the Constitution, and it went to Judiciary Committee. And when that resolution got to Judiciary Committee, and the committee chairman saw this and said, read the Constitution once a year, he looked at that and said, that's the most stupid idea I've ever heard in my life. And you go, wait a minute. For a congressman to read the Constitution once a year is a stupid idea, and that's the response. So we really are in a situation where most people don't know that. The Bill of Rights was added, and Rhode Island was a great part of getting the Bill of Rights added because they didn't want the federal government to expand too much. And the Bill of Rights was added, and then you had the Anti-Federalist Papers. And the Anti-Federalist Papers were those who were behind the Bill of Rights to limit the government. So to really understand the full government, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights, you have to read the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers. Really easy stuff. Federalist Papers, again, by Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison. Anti-Federalist Papers are by folks like Patrick Henry and Samuel Adams. You got Richard Henry Lee, Elbridge Gerry, all founding fathers who signed the documents. And that shows you the whole composition of what government's supposed to do.
And John Jay, wasn't he the Justice of the Supreme Court, the head justice?
John Jay became the original Chief Justice after the Federalist Papers. Federalist Papers went out, and that convinced Americans to ratify the Constitution. So once the Constitution's in place, then George Washington appointed the original Supreme Court, which was John Jay, the Chief Justice, and 5 associate justices. Yeah. But John Jay had a really distinguished career. I mean, John Jay was a president of Congress during the Revolution. He wrote the first military manual for the Continental Army in the Revolution. He was the governor of New York. He just very distinguished. And by the way, he also is a founder of the American Bible Society, and he's also the president of the American Bible Society. So strong faith connection.
So that if people may have some qualms about what the Constitution, what the Federalist Papers mean to the Supreme Court's interpretation of matters, then there's John Jay.
You bet.
As an
authority on it.
As an authority.
Yeah, I mean, there he is on the court. You know, it's interesting, some of the stuff that John Jay did that obviously the court doesn't follow today. But back in the day, John Jay, the original Chief Justice, wrote the commentaries on the Constitution. John Jay, we had jury trials in the Supreme Court, and so a jury would come in, and as they would present evidence, John Jay would have ministers come in and pray over the jury before the jury went out to deliberate. So he had no problem with prayer in the courtroom. We actually have records of whether there were 4-hour communion services that happened in the Supreme Court back then. So they had no trouble with religious activities in the courtroom. And of course today, I was involved in the case 1992 that came out of Providence to the Supreme Court. In that particular case, can you have a prayer at a graduation?
That's right.
And we thought that was going to be a really easy case because when that case, it was Rabbi Leslie Gutterman who offered the prayer in that case. It was called Lee versus Wiseman. Yeah. And in that particular case, we thought this is going to be easy because first public school laws in America were passed in 1647. Public schools were 120 years old at the time of the Founding Fathers. We have records of signers of the Constitution giving prayers at public school graduations in their day. We have records of signers of the Constitution giving sermons at public school graduations. And so here's Rabbi Gutterman, and bless his heart, the school board went to him and said, Rabbi, you know, this is a secular meeting, it's a secular sitting, we want you to pray a secular prayer. What's a secular prayer? You know, but he got the idea. Don't offend anybody. Yeah. His prayer was so bland that in the district court they actually argued over whether or not he'd prayed. I mean, it was that bland. But he did mention God, and they said, well, it must have been a prayer because you mentioned God. Well, we've got the guys who wrote the Constitution actually doing prayers and sermons at public school graduations. But the Supreme Court still ruled against the case here in Providence. 5-4 decision. We lost the case. And the deciding judge in that case saw all this evidence from the Founding Fathers and from the original Constitution signers. And he said, well, it proves one of two things about the Founding Fathers. He said it proves either that they were hypocrites because they knew it was wrong to pray in public and they did it anyway. Now, wait a minute. What if they were right? What if praying in public, which is what they always did, what if the judge is wrong? But no, he said, no, I've got to be right. Founders are wrong. The other thing he said, or it just proves that the founders didn't understand the Constitution, which is an amazing statement to say the guys who wrote the Constitution didn't understand it, but a judge sitting on the Supreme Court 200 years later really knows what it means, and they didn't. No, that was just it was just a presumptuous statement more than any I've seen. But that issue about having even a prayer at a graduation, you know, it's amazing. The First Amendment concerning religion, it's very simple. It says, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. Well, having Rabbi Gutterman say a prayer at a graduation is not Congress making a law. And how we've gone from the First Amendment saying Congress shall make no law to Rabbi Gutterman can't say a prayer at a graduation is ridiculous, but that's where we are today. We had in Minnesota, we had a state employee who was not allowed to park his car in the state employee parking lot because he had a religious bumper sticker on his car. And they said, oh, violates the Constitution. Wait a minute, to park my car in the state parking, I can't have a religious bumper sticker? I mean, it's crazy. In Russellville, Kentucky, a woman worked for the library. They said, oh, you got to take your jewelry off because you have a cross on your necklace and that violates the Constitution. I mean, we've gone so far in trying to suppress religious expression, and that was never the design of the Constitution. And that's why things like the Federalist Papers or like the example of John Jay and what they did is so valuable today. That was never their intent. Now, if we want to sit here today and say, well, we don't care what the Constitution was intended to do, we don't care what the founders wanted, we want to do it different today, that's a whole different debate than trying to say, oh, the founders wanted separation church and state, or the founders were secular and they did. But that's not where we are. People keep trying to take the founders and use them as a reason to excuse secularism in public policy, and that's just not what they wanted.
Yeah. Some people wanted to honor the Founding Fathers, but sort of put them aside by saying that they could not have known about technology, for example. They could not have known about privacy rights, technology. They could not have known about things like abortion, modern elective abortion, or the new Gallup poll, for example, on homosexual marriages. By the way, before I ask the question, Joseph Witherspoon from Texas, the professor at the university, a descendant of John Witherspoon?
You know, I don't know that. That's a good question. I don't know if he is or not.
Well, he
probably is. Most of the Witherspoons tend to track back to John.
He told us in a conference once that Thomas Jefferson in the legislature in Virginia had promoted a pro-life bill.
He did. He did.
I think he said it was bill number 7 or 11 or something like that. Wasn't that isn't that remarkable? But we have a secular mindset today that says that the founders were from a different time.
Yeah.
And they don't know what it's like to be in 2010. So we have to extrapolate from, you've heard this before.
The living Constitution argument.
The living Constitution.
Yeah. There's several problems with that.
Yeah.
One problem, and let me address what you mentioned, because the notion that we deal with things they didn't deal with, you know, technology changes, but the issues don't change. Abortion they dealt with very extensively. Not only Thomas Jefferson, other founding fathers as well. As long as there have been pregnancies, there have been people who didn't want to be pregnant. Now, the only thing that's changed with abortion is the technology around it, not the issue itself. So Jefferson was very pro-life.
Jefferson
was. The Justice of the Supreme Court, James Wilson, who started the first law school in America, and his legal books teaches abortion's absolutely wrong because life comes from God. You don't have a right to take something that doesn't belong to you. John Witherspoon teaches abortion's wrong. Founding fathers spoke about abortion like crazy. You also have the founding fathers dealing with the evolution evolution-creation debate.
Is that
And we
right?
say, oh, wait a minute, you can't do that to Darwin. No, all Darwin did, evolution, most of the major theses of evolution was established by 500 BC. What Darwin did was he took 2,300 years of evolutionary thought and he combined it and synthesized it in one book. Darwin just synthesized what had been out there since 500 BC. So we look at Darwin, but Darwin's ideas weren't new. They were a synthesis of all these others that have been writing. And so the Founding Fathers dealt with very aggressively with the creation-evolution debate. Even Thomas Paine, the least religious Founding Father, went to France and tore the heads off of French educators for not teaching creation science in the classroom.
Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's fascinating.
I mean, the House just lifted the repeal. Now, this isn't that, but the House has lifted the ban on homosexuals in the military. The ban on homosexuals in the military was put there by George Washington in 1778.
Is that
it was also written about by John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. See, the issues aren't new. Now, the technology may change.
Yeah.
Bible says there's nothing new under the sun. So what's cool about the Constitution is the Constitution does not try to address specifics.
Yeah.
It addresses principles. And since human nature really does not change, the Constitution doesn't say, now when the internet comes along, here's what you do. The Constitution says, here's the issues that Congress gets to deal with, here's the issues the President can deal with, and here's the issues the court can deal with, and every issue that comes up today still goes under one of those categories. There's 18 things in the Constitution that Congress is allowed to do. Everything we deal with today fits one of those things. So there really is nothing new. The founders are very wise. See, that's why the Code of Hammurabi, now Hammurabi's code was written before Moses' code, but it's useless today because it says, when you sell your cow, you have to do, it's too specific. Now the Code of Moses comes along and it deals with human behavior. It says don't kill and don't steal and don't perjure yourself, and that's timeless because those are human characteristics. We want to do the wrong thing. But the Code of Hammurabi was too specific and it's worthless today. That's the way the Constitution is. It was not specific. It was more like the Ten Commandments. It gives you principles by which you live, and that's why it's so timeless and so good. Now, the problem with the living Constitution is that it says, well, the Constitution needs to evolve, but oh, by the way, people can't evolve it. We, the judges, will tell you what is to do. And the problem, I did a debate with the guy at the University of Iowa, a professor there, and we were doing church-state kind of issues. And so after I finished mine, he said, okay, he said, I'll concede that you're right. The Founding Fathers did not want a secular public square. He said, but my contention is that we shouldn't be living today under what they wanted 200 years ago. And so I acted really surprised. I said, oh, you mean you're telling me that we should live today under the values we want, not the values they wanted? He said, that's what I'm telling you. I said, you mean policy today should reflect our will, not their will? He said, that's what I'm telling you. I said, I'm so glad to hear you say that, because in national polling right now, 82% of the nation wants daily spoken voluntary prayer in schools. 76% of the nation wants the Ten Commandments posted in public buildings, including schools and courthouses. You have 93% of the nation that wants in God we trust to stay on the money. And I went through all these numbers. I said, so if we had a living, evolving Constitution, we would still have the values today that we had 200 years ago. He said, oh, no, separation church and state. I said, no, wait a minute. You just told me separation didn't matter because that's 200 years old. So what happens is under the living Constitution, they don't want the Constitution to reflect the values of the people. They want it to reflect the values of the judges. And that's a whole different thing. See, I don't want the majority of 9 people telling me what my values have to be. Let me choose we the people. And that's where the Constitution is so cool. It says we the people. If we want to change something, Article 5 of the Constitution tells us how to evolve the Constitution, how to amend it.
Right.
And we've done that 27 times. So we the people are the best ones to change the Constitution. The Constitution didn't let women vote. We did. The Constitution didn't end slavery. We did. The Constitution didn't put term limits on presidents. We did. That's how you evolve the Constitution, not through the courts. And that's what's wrong with that argument about, oh, you know, Founding Fathers didn't know about internet and they rode horses and we don't ride horses. That argument holds no water at all. It needs to be back to we the people.
You've written a number of books, and this is maybe one of the most widely known. Original Intent. Would you say that this is the best book of the books that you've written, or the books that you could recommend, which talks about the views of the Founding Fathers on what are generally thought of as contemporary issues.
That one is probably the best one at looking at the religious views of the Founding Fathers and public policy, because that takes and goes through a number of court cases. I've been involved in 7 cases of the Supreme Court that dealt with religious expressions, and it says here's where the court is, here's where the founders were, here's where the change occurred. So we have a lot of different books on different issues.
Yes. We're getting a time now. We have about
Shutting down time. Sounds good.
5 minutes left.
But we have a variety of books that deal with a bunch of founders' issues on different topics, but
Yeah.
that's the best one on religion.
That's the best. Now, if somebody wants to find out more about what George Washington had to say about homosexuals in the military, about what Thomas Jefferson and John Witherspoon and others had to say about abortion,
Right.
and other quote unquote contemporary issues, is that in the Federalist Papers, or?
Well, actually, that's in their writings, and we've taken and we've done a lot of reports on our website at wallbuilders.com,
Yeah.
where you can read writings, what the founders said about homosexuals in the military or whatever. What's cool about the Founding Fathers is they did on paper what we're doing with camera, tape, and VCR, and they wrote it down. Washington has 100 volumes of writings. Jefferson has 60. Hamilton has 40. Madison has 60. And now those volumes are online where you can search them. So it's really pretty easy to go back and see what their intent was on nearly any topic, any subject. And we've done that. We've gone through the writings, and that's why we have reports on our website that deal with a lot of the topics. I mean, even healthcare. They talked about healthcare back in Thomas Jefferson's administration. Same kind of stuff we're doing today, they did 200 years ago.
Is that right?
The difference was they said health care is a state issue, it's not a federal issue. They said the only health care the federal government does is immigrants coming in, because the federal government's in charge of international issues, states are in charge of domestic issues, so states get to choose what they do with health care. So the Jefferson, the other guy, specifically rejected federal health care, said it has to stay a state issue. But again, you know, we're dealing with issues today that were dealt with 200 years ago.
One of the things, and I don't know how many seconds we have left, but one of the things that concerns me about our life today in modern America is the media. This is why I got into it, because I wanted to be able to tell the truth, and I wanted the truth to be able to be told some of the time.
Unfiltered truth.
Yeah,
that's right.
Well, do you have any thoughts about the media?
Yeah, you know, the media reflects, like any other institution, it takes on the values. It's a car. Car has no value on its own. It takes on the nature of whoever's behind the wheel. And what happened was we really let people get behind the wheel of the media that do not reflect what we believe. Right now, nationally, only 23% of Americans actually believe or trust the media, because the values of the media are so far out of whack. Groups like Rothman and Lichter do studies on the media values and on public values. I mean, we're at opposite ends. 60 to 70% of people will attend church at least once a year. Only 10% of media have been in the church once in the last 10 years. I mean, they're just opposite values. So that's a problem, but that's a problem of us having gotten out of that arena. We just need to get people with our values back in the arena so that people in the media look like people outside of the media, and that's not what we have right now.
I think we're beginning to wind down. Well, David, let me thank you for this presentation. Do you have time to do another one?
Sure, we can shoot one more.
Okay.
You bet. You bet.
So David will be with us next week.
And I decided to start looking for Kristen.